This is CBC Winnipeg News.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Hundreds of Winnipeg seniors worry they could soon be scrambling to find a new home. Lyons Place on Portage Avenue near Langside Street is set to be sold. As CBC's Emily Brass reports, the nonprofit running it is struggling to keep up with rising costs.
But the rest are all covered in trees.
Renee Jameson loves her little apartment on the 16th floor. She enjoys the services and the views, but says living at Lyons Place is more than that.
This is a community. It's not an apartment building.
That community could be at risk. Lyons Housing Centers plans to sell the 40-year-old high-rise. The nonprofit says it spent more than $3.5 million over the past few years and can't afford to keep it up. A group of residents is trying to keep it off the market.
Could be 6 months, could be 2 years, who knows? But people who are between 55 and 105, average age 77, really do have some concern about where they might go.
Lyons Place was being subsidized by the province in Ottawa, but that funding agreement ended 4 years ago. The group says as our population grows older, the government needs to offer seniors more support.
Aging ain't easy, folks. You're all young and you don't know yet. One of these days you're gonna need one of these damn things. Or you're gonna need to be near doctors. Or you're gonna need to have supports coming in to help you do things that are easy to do now.
The seniors met with reporters outside 185 Smith Street. That building used to be low-income housing. Advocates say hundreds of affordable units were lost when the province sold it to a private company to be turned into upscale apartments. The rents here are nearly twice those at Lyons Place.
Many of our people couldn't afford to even begin to look at places like this.
Brown and Jameson are contacting other nonprofits in hopes they could step in and run the place. They wrote to the province, and it says it'll meet with them to address their concerns. Lyons Place did not respond to CBC's requests for comment. Emily Brass, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Questions are being raised about the way Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries purchased its employee shirts for Friday's Orange Shirt Day. The CBC's Kristen Annabelle explains.
The days leading up to September 30th are busy for Michelle Cameron at her store in Polo Park Mall. Her company, Dreamcatcher Promotions, is one of the largest Indigenous-owned shirt printing companies in the country. She's been busy filling out orders for major companies and crown corporations ahead of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This includes orders for Manitoba Hydro, the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority, and a 20,000 shirt order for Canadian Tire.
We probably surpassed what we did last year in orange shirt sales. A lot of corporations, companies are ordering from us.
But one order she won't be filling is for Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries, and neither will any other Indigenous-owned company. This comes after the Crown Corporation decided to put its order to a bidding process. It was looking for someone to print shirts for the many festivals it sponsors and Orange Shirt Day. A local, non-Indigenous company was given the contract, which Cameron says is not the right path.
For me, it's part of reconciliation, right? You know, I think you're actually wanting to participate in reconciliation by linking yourself with an Indigenous company from start to finish.
In a statement to CBC News, a spokesperson for Liquor and Lottery said they reached out to several Indigenous-owned businesses, including Dreamcatcher, to encourage them to bid on the contract. Cameron says she has no record of them contacting her. The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation also sells orange shirts, and all of the proceeds go to initiatives that help residential school survivors. Jennifer Wood is one of those survivors, and she now works at the center.
The orange shirt represents to me that you're respecting the legacy of residential schools, that you're looking at remembering the children that never made it home, that you're remembering a bit of justice by wearing the orange shirt, by the symbolism of that color, that you're in unity and you're empathetic.
While she is encouraged by people wearing an orange t-shirt and supporting Indigenous businesses, she wants government organizations and crown corporations to do more.
It shouldn't be a one day. It should be every day. We shouldn't have to wait a year for organizations or governments to come forward and perhaps join together.
In a statement to CBC News, a spokesperson from Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries said that they partnered with a local Indigenous artist to design the shirts. The spokesperson said that about 1,600 shirts will be distributed for free for employees to wear on September 30th. A further 300 shirts will be available for purchase at cost at local casinos. As for why the Crown decided to go to a public bidding process, the spokesperson said that because of the large amount of shirts and the cost, a sole source contract wasn't an option. Kristen Annable, CBC News, Winnipeg.
If you have a tip for the CBC I-Team, email iteam@cbc.ca, or you can also call the confidential tip line at 204-788-3744. We heard more promises today from the people campaigning to be Winnipeg's next mayor. Among them, help for homeless people and restoring an Indigenous landmark. CBC's Cameron McLean caught up with the campaigns. He joins us now live from our newsroom downstairs. Cameron, what did mayoral candidate Kevin Klein have to say about homelessness?
He wants to set up trailers on city-owned land to provide temporary housing for homeless people, and he wants to do it before this winter. He says he would ask the federal government to provide funding, and he would ask the provincial government to provide social workers to help people find housing and other services.
And people need our help. They need to be connected with services. It sounds easy for you and I. But it's not that easy when you have nowhere to go. You don't have access to those services at your fingertips. We take that for granted in many ways. We have to make it easy to help our residents that are in need right now.
Klein also shared a story about his personal experience with homelessness. He says he spent 2 nights in a Calgary shelter when he was a young adult.
Glenn Murray also made an announcement today at Thunderbird House. What did he have to say, Cameron?
Murray wants the city to fix the Indigenous Cultural Centre on Main Street. It was built during Murray's first term as mayor, but has faced funding challenges since then and needs major repairs. Murray says Thunderbird House should be funded in a similar way as other cultural institutions, like the Canadian Museum for Human Rights.
It is in that league of that, and I can't imagine that we would tolerate, if we walked by the Museum for Human Rights, great ironies in that, if it looked in the condition that this building is. We would be embarrassed and we would be humiliated, and we should be concerned that we take this on.
Murray promised to meet with Indigenous leaders within 100 days of being elected to work out a plan to support the restoration.
Now, did we hear from any other of the candidates today?
Robert Falcon-Willett said he would make transit safer by training transit supervisors as peace officers. He also wants to make it possible for people to use debit and credit cards to pay for fares on buses. Rick Shawn also made a transit pledge. He would speed up the transit master plan with a focus on making bus service more frequent. And Jenny Motkala pledged to restore a 10% funding cut the city made to the Winnipeg Arts Council in 2020.
Thank you, Cameron. CBC's Cameron McLean reporting live tonight. We are getting more information about this morning's officer-involved shooting. The Independent Investigation Unit is looking for eyewitnesses. Here's what they say happened this morning. Police went to a residence on Barber Street to execute a warrant. When they entered the home, officers found a man armed with a knife. One officer deployed a taser. It hit the man, but still he was able to run from the home. Officers found him on Hallett Street. He was still holding the knife, and the IIU says he didn't follow instructions to drop the weapon. An officer fired his gun, struck the man, who was then taken to hospital. He's since been upgraded to stable condition. The IIU is looking for information from witnesses. The investigation is ongoing. Winnipeg police have arrested a 35-year-old Winnipeg man who they think is responsible for a string of more than a dozen break-ins. The man faces 69 charges involving more than $130,000 of stolen property. He's accused of taking everything from cars and wallets to bicycles, tools, and jewelry. Police got a break in this case last week when someone reported a man unloading property from a vehicle, one that turned out to be stolen, into an apartment on Stradbrook, an apartment where some of the stolen items were stored. The man remains in custody. We've heard medical and mental health professionals say over and over again that spending time outdoors in nature is good for us. Connecting humans with nature is a main mission of Fort White Alive. Today, the organization announced the next step in a major fundraising campaign to expand and renew what it calls its campus. Liz Wilson is president and CEO of Fort White Alive. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jenna. I'm happy to be here.
If you're speaking with someone who's never come to visit Fort White Alive, how do you describe to them what it is?
It's a total jewel in the center of Winnipeg, or the south corner of Winnipeg. We are 660 acres of green space, and that represents about 20% of Winnipeg's urban green space. So we have aspen forest, we have lakes, we have prairie. So it's really a real ecosystem here that is just a jewel to immerse people in nature right in the center of the city. So we do outdoor recreation programs here. We focus on environmental education, and we have a social enterprise here at Fort White Farms, an urban working farm right here at Fort White as well.
And now you've embarked on this $35 million fundraising campaign. What are you going to do with the biggest chunk of that money?
It is so exciting. This has been a long time in planning and coming, so we're thrilled to announce this today. So out of the $35 million, $25 million of that is actually going into a brand new building here at Fort White that we're calling Buffalo Crossing. And that's going to be located at our south entrance on McGillivray. So we have a seasonal building there where a lot of parents will remember dropping kids off at summer camp, and we run our paddling programs out of there in the summers. But it was one of the original buildings here at Fort White, and it's had a lot of love. So it's definitely showing some wear and tear over the 40 years that it's been there. And we are using that site now to develop Buffalo Crossing, which will be a brand new gateway entrance to the south part of our campus right off of McGillivray. A 2-story, 18,000 square foot building that will be a main entrance, bridge going over the lake to reconnect some trails on some unused portions of our property, and really just expand the accessibility to our entire site.
When do you hope to have it built?
We're hoping to break ground starting in a couple weeks. So people will start driving by McGillivray, you'll start to notice some fencing going up, and it will be a construction site, and we'll be rerouting the pedestrian active transportation gate on McGillivray. And we will break ground in a couple weeks, and the goal is to have this done by January of 2024, so about a year and a half.
Now, you have a very generous supporter who has offered something to help raise money. Tell me about that program.
Oh my goodness, yes. Bob Williams, a Fort White fan, part of our community here, and a Winnipegger, a total nature lover. We have a video on our website that shows Bob talking about the impetus for his gift, but he has decided to pledge $1 million to us here at Fort White Alive to get the community involved and let everyone be part of this incredible growth story for us. So Bob's gift, his pledge today, was that he will give $1 million, but it's a match. So in his words, he says, help spend Bob's bucks. So he wants everyone to know that, and we want everyone to know that there's no donation that's too small. And a lot of times people think, well, my $50, may not make a difference. It does. Every little bit counts. And this is a community, there's going to be a community building we want to invite everyone to come to and everyone to be a part of. So what Bob has said is that if you give 50, he will match it to make 100. If you give 20, it'll be 40. If you give 1,000, it's 2,000. And he will do that up to $1 million. So that will be $2 million that'll help contribute to getting Buffalo Crossing to make the dream a reality.
Liz Wilson, President and CEO of Fort White Alive, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Meteorologist John Sauder with his $1 million forecast. Did you like that? Did you like how I did that?
Yeah. Well, if you like frost.
I don't. Well, you know, it has to happen. Has to happen. It's something that, you know.
This is the last night we're going to see a frost advisory for a while, and there's a couple reasons for that. We're going to warm up, so we're just not going to have any frost over the next week. And there comes a point when Environment Canada just won't issue frost advisories anymore because it's kind of expected. We're getting, cooler temperatures.
They figure the tomatoes are in and the flowers are dead.
I think that date may be October 1st.
Oh.
I'll have to get a correction on that, but anyway, we're just not going to see much more of that going forward. And you'll see why when you see the temperatures going forward. For now, this is the frost advisory area, not quite as far north in the inner lake or on the east side of Lake Winnipeg as it was last night, but pretty much the same parameters through Portage Prairie and Winnipeg and then out to the east, out to the Ontario border. And the frost advisory's been in effect all day today in northwestern Ontario. So yeah, this is where temperatures are going to be down close to zero. I've got a low of 2 in Winnipeg, but outside the city or in outlying areas certainly could see some frost. So this is where frost is likely. Patchy frost, had some this morning. Temperatures this morning at the airport at one point were at -3. Right now we're at 13. Winds have gone calm, and that's because the high pressure is sitting right over southern Manitoba, giving us this clear sky. Nothing on radar, nothing on satellite either, so there just is a cloud-free sky. Don't often see that, but in the far north, we've got a little bit of cloud, and as a matter of fact, there is a low that is moving, now I'm talking really far north, Cambridge Bay, but tonight, 5 to 10 centimeters of snow. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that anymore. That's farther north, but it is a sign of things to come, right? There's the high pressure, the position of it right now. You notice these arrows that are moving very slowly around that high pressure in a clockwise direction. And the reason that I wanted to show that, because when the high moves off to the east, we get a southerly flow tomorrow. And it's going to start to pick up. The pressure gradient rather tight here, so 30 gusting to 50 on into the afternoon. Maybe a little bit of cloud cover, but generally weather is quiet all across the province, in Saskatchewan as well, and temperatures in the west will be much warmer than in Winnipeg. We're looking at mid-teens here, 18 or so in Winnipeg, more like 24 degrees in Virden and in Melita. And there's a look at your sunny Thursday as well. I'm just going to advance the winds here right into tomorrow afternoon because you can see these yellow, brighter colors. That's where winds will be heavier. And, if I back this up an hour or so, the gusts were up around 44 or so. But you can see over the lakes, it was more like 56 to 60. So winds will be pretty gusty tomorrow in parts of the province, but not until later on in the afternoon. So clear, frost likely, low of 2 within city limits. 3 degrees in the morning, south winds at 20, and then we get windy tomorrow afternoon, but it's going to boost us up to 18 degrees tomorrow, and then on Thursday and Friday, we're in the 21-degree range, lots of sunshine, and I've taken the rain out of the forecast for Saturday, some afternoon cloud and a high of 18 degrees.
Weather Update is brought to you by Home Equip, your trusted local source for Pride Mobility scooters. From sales to rental and repair, our team is here to serve you.
Kids have a lot of questions when it comes to reconciliation in the classroom. They also have ideas for solutions. As students prepare to recognize Orange Shirt Day on Friday, CBC Kids News has organized a panel discussion. Here are Sophia Smoke from Dakota Plains First Nation, Riley Todd Moore from Norway House Cree Nation, and Eli Rowe, whose mom is from Lake St. Martin First Nation, with some of their thoughts on how to teach reconciliation in the classroom.
Advice I would give to teachers on reconciliation would be number one, continue to educate yourself. Again, like I said, there's so much more that isn't written in the textbooks. There's no comparison between talking to a person and then reading a textbook. I would encourage them to sit down with a local elder so they can learn the local history. Sit down over a cup of coffee. That's so much more personal. You're going to learn so much more. You're going to feel so much more than you will if you're looking down at a textbook. Another is be honest with yourself and with your students. don't be afraid to say that you don't know the answer. Don't be afraid to ask a student, like, hey, you know more about this than I do. Don't be afraid to say that, because Indigenous people are not going to judge you. We're not judgy people. If anything, we're going to be thankful with your honesty. So yeah, honesty and education outside of the textbooks is really important for teachers. I think that teachers should know that there are definitely resources out there, especially Indigenous people you can invite in, like elders that can share their story, teach knowledge. They can teach knowledge, Indigenous knowledge. There's definitely a lot of really good Indigenous literature out there, and it's definitely important to know that Indigenous people aren't all one people. There's a diverse groups of Indigenous people all over Canada. Yeah.
Stay thirsty for knowledge. Keep asking questions, and whenever you hear something, ask where it came from. Who taught them that? Ask where you could meet that person. Try to get all sides of the story and keep an open mind.
Great advice, huh? You can watch the entire 30-minute panel if you'd like. The whole discussion hosted by CBC News Kids contributors Isabel DeRoy-Olsen and Ainara Aline is available to watch anytime on cbckidsnews.ca. Still ahead, the cleanup continues. Recovery efforts are underway 4 days after Fiona crashed into Atlantic Canada, leaving a path of destruction in its wake. The full story from the East Coast coming up after the break. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. 4 days after Fiona started slamming Atlantic Canada, residents are still dealing with the destruction left behind by the storm. As Alison Northcott tells us, the devastation is so widespread, people say they can't even begin to think about recovery yet.
Days later, there's still a sense of disbelief.
And as you look behind me and so on, there's nothing but a total disaster.
The Port aux Basques fire chief says this community needs a lot of help to clean up and rebuild destroyed homes.
Where do they pick up the pieces and get moving and so on, right? It's going to be difficult for them.
I could use that.
Melissa Barr is picking up donated clothes at a local elementary school. She and her family left their home in a panic during the storm. No time to take anything with them.
It's very emotional, because it's our first home we've ever owned. We've never owned anything in my whole life. I'm 44 years old, and now I don't have a home anymore.
The Canadian military is on the ground in 3 Atlantic provinces. Their task is to clear debris from roads and bridges so power can be restored. There is plenty of community action, too, like this truckload of donations.
It got bigger than we expected, and it's a great thing.
It's going to go to all those people who have lost their homes and they can't go back into their homes. They need all this.
This is a big part of our identity in PEI, the coastal communities.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau toured some of the affected areas.
We know that it's not just right now that they need help. It'll be for weeks and months and even years to come, and we will be there for each other.
Fisherman Marvin Graham sees his livelihood turned upside down. For many communities, entire industries like agriculture, tourism, and fisheries have been disrupted.
The waters just keep raising every time there's a storm. It just keeps getting higher and higher. I don't know what they're going to do. It needs a lot of work.
So many areas need work. Schools on PEI will remain closed until at least next week. In Nova Scotia, some schools will reopen on Wednesday as crews continue to restore power. But that's just one part of the cleanup, and there's so much more ahead. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Those recovering from post-tropical storm Fiona have faced many challenges. You just saw a lot of them. Imagine what it also did to cellular and internet service. That's made it difficult for many people in Atlantic Canada to access vital information and the resources they need. As Michael Gorman tells us, one expert says that falls to the federal regulator. They've got to do something about that.
When Dorian hit Nova Scotia in 2019, the failure of communication services was attributed in part to cellular towers that lost power. Those towers then lost backup battery power and then had to wait for generators to be turned on. 3 years later, those problems seem to have repeated themselves.
I believe we did a very, very good job at keeping connected.
There are many customers who might not agree with that assessment. Spokespeople for Bell, Eastlink, Rogers, and TELUS say they continue to work to reconnect all customers, but they cannot provide details about when that will happen. Nova Scotia-based provider Eastlink, however, appears to have fared better than most during the storm. About 80% of their cellular towers maintain service throughout Fiona. That's thanks to backup generators that kick in automatically after backup batteries are depleted. The company's CEO says they must be prepared for more severe storms that come more frequently.
It's about building more and more resilience into the network and continuing to learn from these events and eventually get better and better.
But one consumer advocate says wholesale change for telecommunications companies will only come through regulation by the CRTC. John Lawford says cell phone and internet companies need the same kind of performance standard regulations that apply to power companies.
What we need is a plan of action, certain standards that telecoms have to make, or else they have to pay back their customers or otherwise face regulatory repercussions. At the moment, it's just the bottom line. What do they need to do in order to make money? And on balance, the calculus appears to be that they can save money by not having redundant systems or extra backup generators that start automatically.
Premier Tim Houston says communications problems are more than an inconvenience during the storm.
The communications issues that we've all experienced have had a huge impact on just the mental health of people who are trying to reach a loved one. They've had operational issues for crews that are out trying to get on with the recovery. So the impacts they're not an inconvenience. They're very real.
Houston says he plans to raise the issue during future talks with Ottawa. Michael Gorman, CBC News, Halifax.
The British pound stabilized today. Yesterday, it dropped to a record low. That country's turbulence for the currency started Friday when the Conservative government delivered the UK's biggest tax cut in 50 years. CBC's Abby Kupadasan reports on the big gamble taken by the country's new Prime Minister.
British Prime Minister Liz Truss is promising her tax cuts will turn the economic ship around. But some economists had warned against cuts announced last week, saying they'll fuel inflation, which is already hovering around 10%. They also say the cuts disproportionately benefit the rich.
The people that are poor right now, that are on lower incomes, they're struggling with their heating and all their bills. Everything's gone up. Why on earth would they be cutting it for the people in a higher income bracket? It's ridiculous.
You could argue that it's a good strategy because it'll attract sort of businesses to come and set up their establishments in London. But on the other hand, again, it's going to reduce the overall, say for instance, the money that can be allocated to welfare benefits.
On Monday, the markets reacted to those tax cuts. The pound sterling plummeted to historic lows. The pound has made up some ground today, but that's linked to the expectation that the Bank of England will soon intervene and raise interest rates. Some mortgage lenders pulled offers from the market, anticipating that rates will go up. A weak pound also means people will have to pay more for groceries because the United Kingdom imports more than 50% of its food. Millions are already struggling to pay high electricity bills amid the energy crisis in Europe. Labour leader Keir Starmer says the Conservatives have lost control of the economy.
They haven't just failed to fix the roof. They've ripped out the foundations, smashed through the windows, and now they've blown the doors off for good measure.
Starmer also unveiled he would start a publicly owned renewable energy company within a year of becoming Prime Minister. A new poll shows Labour has its largest lead over the Tories in 2 decades. The next general election is set for 2024. Abby Kuadasan, CBC News, London.
The United States is boosting its aid to Pakistan with a total of just over $66 million now going to the South Asian country. Pakistan's dealing with flooding that has killed about 1,600 people since June. The damage also left hundreds of thousands of people without homes. CBC's Margaret Evans looks at the situation in one particular spot in Sindh province.
We're standing on a levee right next to Lake Manchar, and it's a good place to explain at least part of what's going on in this part of Sindh province. When the flooding began, the lake came very close to flooding its banks, coming up over the top here. And when that happened, officials knew that they were in trouble, so they cut this levee, which is about 60 kilometers long, in 3 different places to try to control the water. But it didn't stop the flooding and the devastation to come, because if you look out onto the other side of it, you'll see a valley that used to be lush farmland. People grew cotton here, they grew wheat, and now it's completely submerged in water. We've been touring the area a little bit by boat, talking to some people who are still living or staying on their rooftops, if those rooftops exist, and there aren't very many. Ask them why they're still there, because they don't have clean drinking water. It's impossible, or very difficult to get supplies in or out. They say they're afraid of looting, that what they have salvaged, they've managed to get up onto these high areas. They don't have a plan. They say the government isn't giving them enough help. They can get into the nearest city for about $1 or $2 if they happen to find a boat going along. So it gives you a very clear idea of just how devastating these floods have been, how difficult it is to help people in need. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Sindh Province.
A number of countries are now investigating the leaks in the Nordstream pipelines. Trent Murray explains and has more from Germany.
Authorities say that overnight they detected a rapid depressurization on the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. That pipeline connects an area from near St. Petersburg in Russia into northern Germany. Very unusual that there would be a rapid depressurization of it, but what makes it even more unusual was that it occurred just hours after a similar depressurization event occurred on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It's a separate pipeline, but one that runs a very similar route. We understand that specialist divers are now on the way there to try and determine what exactly has occurred, but both Sweden and Denmark have confirmed that they have detected gas leaking to the surface of the ocean within their territorial waters. They've had to set up exclusion zones to boats and shipping because of the danger. Obviously concerns as well about maritime life within that zone, but there is just so many questions about why this has occurred. Experts speaking here in German media say it is just not normal that 3 separate pipelines would all begin leaking at the same time within 24 hours. A lot of questions around this, but we do know that these pipelines have been a real flashpoint between Europe and Russia in recent months. Of course, Berlin blocked Nord Stream 2 from opening at all because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In response, Russia's Gazprom began slowing down and then stopped supplies entirely on Nord Stream 1. So there is still, I think, a lot more investigation to be done here, a lot of questions about what has occurred, but we do know that the German security services have now been engaged. Trent Murray for CBC News, Berlin.
Meteorologist John Sauder joins us again after the break. He and I will look at Hurricane Ian, its trajectory, and then John will bring us his Manitoba forecast. You're watching CBC Winnipeg News. Hurricane Ian is churning through the Gulf of Mexico now, headed to Florida. Officials have issued evacuation orders for more than 2 million people, including those in parts of St. Petersburg and Tampa.
Yeah, forecasters are expecting this to intensify to a Category 4 storm before it makes landfall there tomorrow afternoon. Katie Simpson has more.
Across western Cuba's farming communities, Hurricane Ian cut a swath of destruction. Wind gusts topping 200 kilometers an hour ripped branches from trees and tore apart buildings. The power is out for tens of thousands, with no firm estimate on when it will be restored. Ian is now taking aim at Florida, and while its exact path is unclear, it is certain to bring misery.
In some areas, there will be catastrophic flooding
and life-threatening storm surge.
More than 2 million people, mostly along the Gulf Coast, are under evacuation orders.
Do not wait. Time is of the essence. Act now.
Properties in low-lying areas are being boarded up, and there's a rush to fill as many sandbags as possible. The worst of Ian is expected to hit as early as Wednesday night, somewhere between Fort Myers and Tampa Bay.
Our biggest concern as we wait for this storm to make landfall is storm surge. And I will note that storm surge is a leading cause of hurricane-related fatalities.
The rain is already falling in the southern part of the state, the start of what is expected to be a long, brutal haul.
We're going to see Ian slow to a crawl once it makes landfall in Florida, moving only 4 or 5 miles per hour. We could see some areas get 20 to 25 inches of rainfall. So water is going to be a huge story with this storm.
President Joe Biden has spoken with some of the mayors of the major cities in Hurricane Ian's path, promising to provide them with whatever they may need in this moment and whatever they'll need in the days and weeks to come. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.